Welcome, gentle reader, to this episode of Everything is Everything by my friend Amit Varma and I. Amit, what are you doing?
I want you to do this also. Just do what I'm doing. Just follow me. Put effort. Put effort. Put effort. Ajay, we are bench pressing.
Gentle reader, we are back to a trajectory that we had begun earlier. We had done one episode on what is the fundamental concept of a state. We had done a second episode on what should a state do and what are the implementation difficulties that are faced. Today we're going to start on a third pillar of this edifice, which is called public choice theory. It's a powerful tool for understanding the world and for being more wise in how we engage with the state. So, Amit, can you get us started? What is public choice theory?
So, public choice theory is actually my favorite branch of economics in a sense. Now, what is economics broadly? I am not a trained PhD or a credentialed academic like you are, but I love economics because it's taught me so many life lessons. Because to me, economics is a study of human behavior. You look at how, under conditions of scarcity, people respond to incentives. So it is a study of literally everything. To me, economics and literature go side by side in revealing the human condition. And public choice theory is the application of what we know about economics, the economic frame, to politics, to the whole business of politics, which includes politicians, bureaucracy, elections, voting, the state, government, everything that happens there. And that's deeply important to do. The reason it is deeply important to do, and why I think this is also a great standalone episode, not just part of the three, do watch the other two, but a standalone episode, and every Indian should think about it. Because in India, we have internalized the oppressive nature of the state. I often like to say that the biggest religion in India is a religion of government. Wherever there is a problem, we will think, hey, Mai Baap Sarkar should solve this, and that is where the solution always lies. And very rarely it does, but most of the time it really doesn't. And I want us to take a step back and examine a whole bunch of things that we have normalized. And one of the core truths, which seems so obvious, but one should not have to say it, but I'll say it anyway, is that government is not some mythical benevolent beast sitting up there. Governments consist of people, right? And people respond to incentives. They are frail, they are flawed, they are often rational, but everything that happens within that system is explicable. They are not some, Sant Mahaguru kind of people who have something called the public interest at heart. And really, when you think about it, there is no such thing as a public interest. I want something, you want something, Namsita and Vaishnav want something. We want different things. There is no aggregated thing. But often people will say, oh, the government will do X, Y, Z in the public interest. And that is a lie. And I want to break that down and talk about why it is a lie. And I want to also break it down by breaking down how incentives affect different people within that behemoth that we call the state.
Too often, the word state is thought of as some institutions. So you think that there is a police, you think there is a public prosecutor, you think that there is a central bank. I think people are too quick to jump to the assumption that this is actually an institution which is governed by the rule of law and it will impassively produce consistent rules-based behavior across rain and shine. That's an aspiration. That may not be the reality. So Max Weber's definition is not that the state is a collection of institutions. Max Weber's definition is the state is a community of people that achieve and maintain the monopoly of physical violence on a territory. And this is a very important distinction. Now, that community of people may ideally form itself into institutions and laws, in which case its behavior becomes more predictable, less capricious, where those individuals don't wield arbitrary power. Those are all aspirational things. We shouldn't assume that they are there in this country, in this time, meaning every government in this world is at a different state of development in the extent to which it has achieved institutional quality. But Max Weber's definition is universal, that the state is a community that achieves and maintains a monopoly of violence. And there the word is community. And the community word readily takes us into your thought process. A community is a bunch of people. And then the economics lens encourages us to think about what are those people desiring? What are they maximizing? Where are they going in their life? And then that will generate predictions about their behavior when wielding the coercive power of the state.
And even when we use the word community, I want to be sort of somewhat careful, because I think that one of the dangers that we often make is thinking in terms of groups, where we really need to think in terms of individuals. You know, a community does not have values. People within the community have values and interests and so on and so forth. And that might result in a way as if, the community has values, but really it doesn't. And we need to always keep thinking in terms of individuals. So I want to sort of start talking about the various different aspects of the state, and look at how incentives affect politicians, bureaucrats, voters, how special interest groups use government and use the incentives of people. But before that, for the gentle readers, a list of recommended readings which I think is important. These are all absolutely seminal books. In 1962, there was a great book called The Calculus of Consent by James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock. And this is regarded by many people as really the start of public choice theory. Now, you can go back to David Hume and Adam Smith and all of them saying things which fall within that rubric of how incentives are, affecting people within government. But the first great book of this is, this book by Buchanan and Tullock. Then in 1965, you have a book of which I believe you have the first edition, The Logic of Collective Action by Mansur Olson. And in 1967, there is an economic theory of democracy by Anthony Downs. And there are a bunch of books starting 71 by William Niskanen. But the first key book I want you all to read, and the first book I read on public choice theory, which was a gateway drug for me into all of this, is a great book by Eamon Butler called Public Choice, a Primer. It's available as a free PDF. You could literally read it in less than an hour. We'll link it from the show notes. Do check that down. Masterful book, and much of what, in fact, everything that I have learned is from these books, right? So credit where they are due. These are the books you should read. And I think this is to understand India today, to understand the way that we, the way the world functions, the way our society is. We also have to understand the way the state is and why people behave the way they do, because our institutions also shape our culture and shape our behavior and so on. So public choice theory is phenomenally important for that reason. So let's start by talking about politicians, right? What are the incentives of politicians? Politicians are driven by power. And I'll take a brief detour here. People often ask the question that, look at our freedom fighters. They were such great individuals. They were such men of great values and learning and all of that. We don't have leaders like that today. And I actually wrote a column for Bloomberg Quint where I explained that using public choice theory, where I looked at incentives. And I said, look at the incentives of, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Rajaji, all of those people. Their incentives weren't power, because power wasn't on the equation for them. They were driven by higher values, higher principles, and they fought for those. And politics at that time of freedom struggle attracted that kind of people who cared about those kind of higher principles and not for power or lucre or any of those things. But today, the way the system is set up, where everything is, where the state is so centralized, there is so much power to be had, it attracts that kind of person. It just attracts a different kind of person. If Nehru was alive today, I posit that he would be Pratap Bhanu Mehta. He would not be Narendra Modi, right? And all of these people have their roles, and I don't want to diss anyone or pass value judgments, but that's just kind of where we are. And I actually regard Pratap much more highly than Mr. Nehru, but leaving that aside. So what are the incentives of politicians today? The number one incentive of a politician today is to get elected to power. This automatically means that a politician's time horizon is always a short term. It is a next election. That could be 5 years away, but if you're leading a party, there are always some local elections happening somewhere or the other. And you have to sort of cater to those voters. So you are not really thinking of the long term, and you're not thinking counterintuitive. A lot of the great policies that we would want carried out have at their core counterintuitive insights. Like, life is not zero sum. It's a win-win game. It's positive sum. Everything is double thank you moments. But this is deeply counterintuitive. People imagine for me to get ahead, something has to be taken from others and given to me. That is an intuition, and it is wrong, but that is how we have evolved. Similarly, ideas of spontaneous order are deeply counterintuitive. The way societies, markets work, the way languages form, the way natural selection works is bottom-up evolution. But we are conditioned to think of a top-down way with a strong leader who will, if the price is too high, what do? I will fix the price. And we know that kind of shit doesn't work. So, number one, the consequence of having an incentive that is based on the next elections and that is aimed at pleasing a majority of the people is that you often have to, ignore ideas that will only show you results in the long run, where the causation may be difficult, and you have to cater to popular sentiment, whether it is right or wrong. That is one objective. And even there is a danger. There's a famous cartoon about two wolves and a sheep discussing what to have for dinner. And it's majority voting. So what's going to happen? Right? And that is, of course, a great danger in a democracy. The second thing I want to point out is that politicians are not just incentivized by what voters want. There is an interplay between politics and money that comes into the picture, and that is deeply sort of dangerous. And politicians, once they come to power, control an enormous amount of money. Now, this is, something that I find really illuminative when I think about this is a matrix that Milton Friedman had once drawn up, which you'll see on the screen now, about how we spend our money on whom. And what he says is, if I spend my money on myself, I will economize and I will also seek great value. If I spend my money on somebody else who I don't know, I will economize, but I won't really bother about value. If I spend somebody else's money on me, I will not economize, but I will seek great value. And if I spend somebody else's money on somebody else, I will neither economize nor seek value. Right? This is the whole business of government, and this is, so politicians, when they spend what we say their money, or when they spend our money, are not incentivized to either economize or to sort of seek value. And this becomes an issue because there is this great interplay between money and power, which, I once described in this limerick I wrote. I used to write a weekly limerick for the Times of India. And one of them, I claim, is the first public choice limerick ever written.
And this is even before ChatGPT.
This is even before ChatGPT can't write limericks because it can't count, it can't do maths. So syllables are really important, because a good limerick, and we will have a link to how to write limericks, but it's not just a rhyme scheme of AABBA. It is also a syllable count, and ideally it should be 99669, as this one is. Okay. Politics. A neta who loves currency notes told me what his line of work denotes. It is kind of funny. We steal people's money and use some of it to buy their votes. Right? And there are various ways in which, the state gathers money. One of them, of course, we know is rent seeking, right? Rent seeking is an economic term. It is not about you own something and you rent it out. But what it means is that when the state has control of something, or when it creates an artificial scarcity in something, it can then make a lot of money off that. For example, the government could one day decide that Amit, Varma, Ajay, Shah, all of these people, they can't do podcasts and all that. What is seen and the unseen, so many hours. We will give licenses for podcasters. So I have to go to the state to get to my BAP to get a license for podcast, and that license is renewable every 6 months, and of course I have to pay a bribe for it, and that is rent seeking, right? We've spoken about this friend of mine who owned a restaurant in Bangalore, and the fire department said you have to have multiple entrances, and the excise department said you can only have one entrance because we want to track alcohol going in and out, and all of them are taking bribes from the poor guy, no matter how many doors he has. So, again, that is rent seeking. This is one classic way.
I want to add to this. I think PJ O'Rourke has a great line where he says that giving money and power to politicians is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenagers. And it's a profoundly different worldview compared to what many people in India are thinking. When we start becoming skeptical about the way in which a government may use either coercive power or spending power, if you live in a my bap world, you think government is good, government is some NGO, government will dole money out to the needy and be good to poor people, then you might be willing to go along with higher tax GDP ratios with more resourcing in the hands of the state. But if you are more skeptical about the nature of government spending, then maybe we are better off with a lower tax GDP ratio. Maybe the Indian state would do more good if it had less money. And that's something which is really a thought that is not present amongst economists in India today. All economists are generally on the side of a bigger government.
And you throw a PJ O'Rourke quote at me, I will reply to you, I will raise you with H.L. Mencken, where he said every election is a sort of an advanced auction sale of stolen goods. So let's talk about special interests. Politicians, if they want to get elected, need tons of money. Where does and all of this has really come on in India. It's black money, we kind of know by now. So where does this money really come from? This money comes from special interests who will then want an ROI. This is an investment they are making. This is not something they are doing from the goodness of this heart that, oh, I like this neta so much, mera dost hai, society ke liye acha hai. They'll want a return on investment, and therefore this return on investment will happen through policies that will favor them. Maybe there is some kind of direct corruption involved that, you give a government tender to somebody who funded you. But most of the time, it is more insidious than that, where you'll have to, create legislation that may protect the special interest from competition, that may redistribute wealth to them in different ways, and we'll sort of talk about that. And the reason all of this is not noticed by people at large like us is a phenomenon which is termed, which in fact Mansoor Olson I think coined, which is concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. Now what does this mean? If the government takes 1 rupee from every individual in the country and gives it to Ajay Shah, right? What will happen is that everybody who's losing 1 rupee, they don't even know they're losing 1 rupee. They don't even know where it's going. They don't care. So the costs are diffused. But the benefit is concentrated to Ajay Shah. You're suddenly getting, 1.7 billion rupees or whatever it is. And you will gladly, give your local politician 10% of that and say that, okay, I will help you come to power. And then you create this regulation which redistributes money from all of these poor people to me. And interest groups get away with this because, the benefits are concentrated, the costs are diffused. Another example of this could be, let's say the small retailers of this country get together. Now they are both a voting bloc and they are also funders of different parties at different levels. So there are parties in this country which depend on, say, small traders as an important bloc, both in terms of funding and voting. And then they can say that, okay, let's have FDI in retail. We don't want competition. Right? And what happens when you have FDI in retail? What happens is that I, as a consumer, would either get higher value for the money that I spend, or I would get something of the same value at a lower cost, right? I am essentially losing money. It is being redistributed from me to the interest group at large, from a large set of people to a particular rich interest group, which is why I say all interventions in free markets are redistributions from the poor to the rich, from the poor to the rich. And I have a column on this, we'll link that from the show notes. And where do these regulations come from? From special interest groups, which might be saying protect us from competition, or, put a tariff on, competition from China, etc., etc. And they sort of, play an overwhelming part in policy. Now, there are various examples of this from the US. And the problem, frankly, in my limited understanding, is far worse in the US than here, where there is complete state capture by special interests. There's a great book on this, again, I'll recommend for gentle readers, called Government Send by Jonathan Rauch, which is a scary read. And I don't think we are so far along in India, but we could easily get there. And there are examples of this. For example, Sheldon Adelson. For many, many years, and I've been a professional poker player, so I know this. Sheldon Adelson, for many, many years, was one of the billionaires who wanted to ban online poker, right? And so very hated person in professional poker figures. And what is the reason for that? He was a casino owner. He owned the physical casinos, the Sands, the Venetian, and a whole bunch of others. And online poker was, according to him, a threat for him. Actually, it's kind of ironic that it really wasn't. It's just that the ecosystem of gambling expanded when online poker came in. It didn't hurt the live casinos, but he thought it would hurt the live casinos. So for many years, he lobbied, and he was one of the big funders of the Republican Party. And for many years, he lobbied to keep online poker banned. There's another great phrase which I find really amusing, which has a Bollywood connection. You know, what does the Shah Rukh Khan film Raees have to do with public choice theory? Quiz question, Ajay Shah.
Sorry, I don't know. Tell us.
You don't know. Have you seen Raees?
No.
Good. Okay. So in that film, Shah Rukh Khan plays this macho bootlegger, right? Alcohol is banned in Gujarat, and he is this macho bootlegger. And then one day, this politician is doing a Daru Bandi Yatra, right? And basically, Daru Bandi Yatra means he's doing this rally saying alcohol must be banned. And Shah Rukh Khan wants to stop him. And he's playing a bootlegger. And the point is, this makes no rational sense. Right? This makes no rational sense because actually the bootlegger and the politician who wants alcohol banned, their interests are the same. They are on the same side. There's a phrase for this called bootleggers and Baptists. It was coined by the regulatory economist Bruce Yandel. And the idea of this is this, that the Baptist will say that alcohol is evil, it breaks families apart, it is immoral. We must ban alcohol, right? So the Baptist gets alcohol banned. So alcohol is banned. And then the bootlegger comes in and says, right, you have banned it. I am the bootlegger. I will give you daru, right? And actually the two are hand in hand. Sometimes they are literally in hand, and sometimes they are working for the same kind of means. So therefore, Raees makes no sense. The Shah Rukh Khan character should be like supporting the politician, saying, "Aao, yatra karo, and, I will dance at your wedding also." But that kind of gets that wrong. But this shows you the many insidious connections and the ways in which special interests kind of rule the entire political game. And we miss it. We naively think that, oh, they're going to ban FDI in retail. They are protecting our small traders, right? While actually something else is going on. Money is being taken away and given to those guys, right? And there are so many regulations that, sound pious, sound good, but you got to dig into the reasons behind them. You got to ask, why is this happening? And, so that's kind of my take. And you, Ajay Shah, no other man, has worked with government for 15, 20 years. Give me some stories. This is a moment.
I have two things to say on this. One is that the one thing worse than a world where private firms can lobby with the government and influence policy is one in which they cannot. Because once you have a private sector that is so disempowered that it has no say in policy making, then it is even worse. And that is what we have in India. So what we have seen in India is that there has been a decline in the rule of law, and many state agencies, most notably regulators, have extreme arbitrary power over an industry which they oversee. And there is a reign of fear, and then the industry backs away and just stops asking for any policy changes because nobody's going to hear them because they have no influence.
So would you say the problem here is more rent seeking than special interests in India's case?
There's a different level of an administrative state problem here, that there are politicians and officials who are the ruling class and they are impervious to what anybody wants. So now we have to reconstruct what are their objectives, what is their maximization. It can be ideology, it can be corruption, it can be laziness, it can be the pleasure of having the most powerful people in the country kowtowing to you, asking them for favors. There are many, many things that are wrong with this. But I do want to draw a line that if you are in a London or a New York or a Tokyo environment where private firms get to go into meetings and criticize and disagree with government people about alternative policy choices and lobby for things that are in their self-interest, that is more dispersion of power as compared to power being concentrated amongst certain officials and politicians who then pretty much get to do whatever they want, and the private sector has been coerced into silence, and I think that's a less good world. So what you describe as a scary environment of America, I think is a better environment than places without rule of law where the private sector is so scared they keep quiet. And that brings me to the question of the money aspects, that there are two kinds of worlds once again. There is a better world in which firms and rich people pay money to political parties and expect a reciprocity where certain policies will be made in ways that are good for their business interests. There is a less good world in which it's more of a protection racket, that if you don't fund the party, then state coercive agencies will be used against these people. So that is a less good thing. So once again, be careful what you wish for. The one thing worse than the reciprocity between the rich and the government on policy is a funding environment without reciprocity.
That's a great point and an added nuance. I mean, what I would sort of add to that is that it is, of course, a healthy environment where every citizen, whether you're a part of a company or not, can lobby the government for something. The problem becomes when the government has too much power and when the government can use that power disproportionately to interfere in markets or to interfere in the lives of people. In an ideal world, a lot of those powers aren't there with the government at all. I cannot go and ask a government then that block entry into that market, protect me, because the government would not have the power to do that. It is not within its purview. That is the ideal world I want. Whereas what you are pointing out is that there are two worlds. One is a world where the government can do that and often does do that. And you should read Government's End, by the way, by Jonathan Rauch. It's a great book, and things are pretty alarming even in the US. Though I agree that it is kind of worse where you cannot even go and ask them for that, where everything is sort of the stick, there is no carrot, everything is rent seeking, which is really kind of how I see it, using the power of the agencies and essentially doing hafta. Like, I really think of the elections as a battle to be the one legal mafia for 5 years. That is really what you are fighting for. Right, so bureaucrats, right, babus and so on. And my dad was an IS officer, by the way. He was a bureaucrat. So this is kind of close to my heart. And he was a good man, and by all means, unfortunately for me, perhaps a little too honest or completely honest. But, I often think that the stereotype that one can have of bureaucrats, that, oh, babus are corrupt and etc., is really unfair. I think all of these people are essentially good people, but they're responding to incentives. And what are the incentives? And I think about one way to think about bureaucrats. Of course, William Niskanen has some great books on this. But for me, a classic book of comedy that is also a book of public choice theory is Parkinson's Law by C. Northcote Parkinson. And Parkinson's Law centrally is that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. But he then expands it, and there are all kinds of corollaries, like officials want to multiply subordinates, not rivals. Officials want to build their budgets as much as possible, improve the scope of their power, improve their budgets. And so this is one set of incentives, that you want to protect your turf, you want to expand your turf. Another set, and this leads to resistance to change. Any change that may have unpredictable consequences and could harm you, you will resist them. Equally, this leads to a sort of a status quo bias, where you will not again want radical change in any direction. You are on a gravy train, you want that gravy train to continue as long as possible. If you are in a particular ministry which really should be abolished, intellectually, if you, from the outside, you would have agreed that, hey, this ministry only should not be there. But once you are inside, you want to kind of protect your turf. Now all this is theory, right? You have had far deeper sort of interaction with bureaucrats over the last 20 years. One could say, in a manner of speaking, in working with the finance ministry and all that, you have been a bureaucrat yourself. So tell me a little bit about all these pulls and pressures, because I have had, bureaucrats on this show. The great KP Krishnan did an 8-hour plus episode with me, and there's hardly someone I can admire more than him for, that the level of public service, the intellectual integrity, the honesty, etc., etc. But in general, I found, and I know he would disagree with me and you might disagree with me, that he was an outlier and that men like him are outliers. Give me a sense of, the messy business of the state, and what are the incentives at play? How do we look at it like an economist?
In the dream of liberal democracy, what we want is a world of checks and balances. So the core principle is dispersion of power. There should be no one powerful person. So we want to disperse power between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And also, we want many other forces in society to matter. So journalists should matter, intellectuals should matter, rich people should matter, business people should matter, the people should matter, non-profit organizations should matter.
Podcasters should matter.
Podcasters should matter above all. Okay, that's a design of a good world where there are many voices, many forces, and everybody has a say, everybody matters, and power is dispersed. That's the definition of a healthy liberal democracy, that power is not concentrated, that power is dispersed. What happens in a bad environment, what we see in illiberal countries, is the emergence of what is called the administrative state. The administrative state is the rule of officials, where the legislature drops away, they don't really matter. The officials run the country with a minister there calling the big shots, the officer calling the small shots, but the officers are the rulers of the country, and the judiciary becomes more and more irrelevant. It is not a check and balance to the executive, and all the other voices have been dulled and diminished. I already talked about the interests of the firms, or take the thinking and the talking by journalists, by intellectuals, by civil society organizations, many pieces. The administrative state is one in which power gets concentrated into the officials. Okay, that's a good description of the problem that we face in India today. That it has become the case that almost all the state power, the coercive power, is in the hands of some officials. There's no check and balance. The legislature doesn't matter, the judiciary doesn't matter. It's really the executive, the department, the regulator, up to a minister, a prime minister, a chief minister. That's what runs. That controls the coercive power and has more or less unlimited arbitrary power over the subjects, and the people have become the subjects. So it's very important to use this word administrative state and understand the pathology of officials in the administrative state, and that's different from liberal democracy. Again, I feel a lot of people in India, we have read the right books, and we inappropriately use Western notions of how liberal democracies work when we are thinking about the environment here. And there is a technical phrase, administrative state, that describes what we are getting into in India. That's not a healthy liberal democracy. It is concentrated power with the officials. And that, of course, works poorly, because all power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we should be thinking of the moral universe of these officials, okay, as you are correctly enjoining upon us. In this, I feel one of the most harmful metaphors is the suitcases of cash. Okay, I blame Bollywood for this. Nobody done it other than Bollywood. The idea that officials are fine, work goes on, other than suitcases of cash. So we have caricatured the problem of the conflict of interest of officials and the misbehavior of officials. We've reduced it into taking suitcases of cash. So we think a good guy is one who doesn't take suitcases of cash, and a bad guy is one who takes suitcases of cash. And I think that that's a poor characterization. I have grown to think of the word corruption as being doing things that are not aligned with the professional objectives of the organization, for your own personal gain. And personal gain comes of many kinds. Personal gain comes of the explicit corruption of taking suitcases, the less explicit corruption of doing favors to friends and family. So, for example, you will not enforce rule of law against your friends and family. Okay? Corruption is doing expedient things that are conducive to your own career objectives. Okay? And we see a lot of civil servants in India doing things that they would themselves not honestly agree with, but that's a way in which their career will go up, and maximizing career objectives, maximizing power is unquestioned. And finally, we should never lose sight of the conflict of interest, of laziness, of a good night's sleep, of having no stress. Doing nothing is extremely attractive. You get the power of a civil servant and you do no work. And that's the deep explanation of officials in India that ban things. Okay? Understanding cryptocurrency is hard. Ban it. Okay? Understanding complicated derivatives trading is hard. Ban it. Okay? And so on. So a lot of the instincts of officials in India to shut off parts of the economy are coming not from a simplistic socialistic place where they want that complete state control because they are a central planner. There's no Mahalanobis and Nehru anymore. Nobody is dreaming what the country wants to be. That part is gone. I mean, that is 40s and 50s India that faded away a long time ago.
And in a sense, thank God that's gone, but nevertheless.
So I don't think there's anybody left who's meaningfully trying to imagine central planning in an industrial policy sense of what the country should be. But people are thinking that what will be good for me, what will be good for my career, for maximizing my powers, for avoiding trouble. Trouble is a problem, and the Indian bureaucracy does have really weird incentive structures where doing good things that are good for the country are really not seen or rewarded, but getting into trouble will destroy your career. So the mood of the official is ban things, that when in doubt, shut it down. And you see myriad expressions of that. It could be all restaurants should close down after 10 p.m. Okay, because I don't want the people up and about, because there will be some occasional crimes which will hit the newspapers and that will look bad for me. The person doesn't see the adverse impact upon the people and the society and the cultural vibrancy and the greatness of a city and the economy when restaurants are open all night. Okay. So I feel these are some elements of the moral universe of officials in India that we need to understand. And I think the deep story is that we need the deepening of democracy. We need more democracy. We need to create checks and balances and disperse power. We need to make the legislature, the judiciary work alongside the executive. All power should not collapse into the executive, and we need myriad voices and power centers and sources of legitimacy that are outside of the government, so that officials feel fear. Officials should feel the burn of checks and balances where things go wrong and the society turns around and hits back. Okay, Amit, now we come to the great temple of the Amar Chitra Katha version of democracy, which is elections. Okay, surely that is simple and clean. The people, they vote and all problems are solved. How would we apply the lens of public choice theory to elections?
So, before we talk about the great temple of Amar Chitra Katha democracy, which is elections, I want to talk about the great temple of Indian entertainment, which is Bollywood. And this is a question for dear readers, that I used to have a section in this policy magazine I used to edit to Pragati called Houseful Economics, where I would take a film, talk about a scene from the film or some aspect of the film, and then illuminate an economic theory or a particular concept from neuroscience or whatever through that film. It was called Houseful Economics. So my question for all of you is, would you like us to do a regular section like that on the show? If you do, we'll do. But the reason I thought of that is that in one particular column of Houseful Economics, I'd written about the wonderful film Newton. Have you seen Newton? So Newton stars Rajkumar Rao as this guy called Newton Kumar, who goes to this place in Chhattisgarh and he's trying to, organize people to vote. And he puts up voting booths and all, and nobody's interested. No one gives a shit. No one is coming. No one is voting, right? But then eventually there are some events and people do gather. So he is trying to teach them their civic duty. This is why you should vote. This is how you vote, etc., etc. And he finds they are least interested. They don't care who's on the ballot. They don't give a shit. They've shown up because they had to show up. And I thought that, unlike Rais, this really gets it right. This shows an understanding of economics, particularly of a concept which I first learnt about from An Economic Theory of Democracy by Anthony Downs. It's a 1967 book. And that concept is called rational ignorance, right? Now think of the point of view of a voter. I am going to vote in an election, and my vote, the election is not going to be decided by one vote. Statistically, massively unlikely. So actually, my vote doesn't make a difference, right? So A, my vote doesn't make a difference or has a ridiculously low likelihood of making a difference. Though, by the way, when I said this in a Scene Unseen episode sometime, and then somebody corrected me and said there was some local election in India which was decided by one vote and the loser's wife hadn't gone to vote. So which is like, kindly, if your spouse is in an election, kindly vote. One vote can make a difference. But so here's the thing, that therefore, rational ignorance means that I have a scarcity of time. I have a scarcity of attention or mental bandwidth, all of that. I want to spend that attention, I want to spend that time on things that affect me in the everyday, right? Voting doesn't affect me in the everyday. My one vote isn't going to make a difference. And even if hypothetically it made a difference, it's not going to, even if my candidate wins by one vote, it's not going to really make a material difference to my life. So why should I put in the cognitive effort of figuring out ki party kaun hai, manifesto kya hai, record kya hai, what are the policies I want and who's most likely to promulgate them, and how do I balance all those different considerations? So This is again something that I learnt about while reading public choice theory. And at this point, I also want to sort of tell our readers that Ajay and I are not doing this episode to to give definite opinions about this bad, that good, or to pass judgment on a particular voting system or the other. This is just a great frame. If you apply this frame, it's just helped me understand my country and my politics and my society better, and therefore I think it's useful. And the reason I also say that is that there are aspects of that I can't quite wrap my head around. For example, what electoral system do you use, right? In India, we have first past the post. First past the post means that a party with 35% of the votes can actually have 80% of the seats. It is entirely possible. It is possible to get 30% of the votes in one election and be in power, and in the other election be absolutely nowhere. Now, what has been proposed in the past and almost got through, I had an old episode of The Seen and the Unseen with JP Narayana, link from the show notes, where JP in the early aughties almost got proportional representation through the government. He had friends in high places, kind of spoke to the different parties, and at that time the UPA was in charge, and they had almost kind of agreed. All the principal players had agreed, and then Sonia Gandhi said no, because Sonia Gandhi's sense was that, oh, we will be in power forever, we don't need it. This will hurt us. Right now, we are the party in power with first past the post. This will hurt us. Now, the irony of that is that had proportional representation got through, the BJP would not be so dominant today, and the Congress would have many more seats than they do. And the idea of proportional representation broadly is if you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats. And it's an interesting system because then you have, minority voices are represented, and I mean minority party voices, sometimes minority, sometimes not, but regardless, you have all kinds of different interests which can be protected, which can have a voice in parliament, and that is not the case. Now again, I don't want to pass a judgment on what kind of system we should have or should not have. Regarding proportional representation, in fact, I brought the idea up with Pratap Bhanu Mehta in an episode I did with him, and he said no, it would be an absolute disaster, it would tear the country apart. So whatever, two people I think are perhaps the tallest intellectuals in this country today, having opposite views. Complicated subject, but worth studying, because we take democracy for granted as being first past the post, not necessarily. We also take democracy for granted in the sense that we think ki, yaar, if we are electing our leaders by voting, that is democracy. And that is not democracy. We need it to be a democratic republic. We need to be a republic that requires rules of the game, a constitution, but that is the next chapter, and we'll kind of come to that as well. But I find it fascinating about looking at, the whole sort of why do people vote the way they do. And often you vote in a tactical way. Ajay Shah and Nomsita and Vaishnav could be running in an election, and I might want to vote for Nomsita because she has the best policies, but she doesn't really have a chance of winning. It's you and Vaishnav, and you are a scoundrel, but Vaishnav is close to you. So instead of voting for Namsita, I vote for Vaishnav. There's tactical voting happening. Are people's true preferences being revealed? In fact, it is impossible for people's true preferences to be satisfied in a political marketplace. Kenneth Arrow had this great impossibility theorem to that effect. And I've also had episodes on the anti-defection law with Barun Mitra. I've discussed it with R. Madhavan. And maybe, I know you feel strongly about that as well, but that also gets in the way of sort of our democracy.
Yeah, I want to say three things here. On the question of first past the post elections, I have been greatly influenced by the history that led up to the modern German constitution. It's a very interesting journey that goes up there. But post Second World War, there was a central objective of how to make sure that an Adolf Hitler and a Nazi party, which won the elections in 1933 with something like 32% of vote share, and destroyed an entire country.
An entire continent.
An entire continent. So the central objective was how to create checks and balances so that that kind of thing cannot happen again, and to create checks and balances against extremes of power, against a passionate base that will turn out to vote, and so on. And there was a huge amount of debate and discussion there, and they chose proportional representation. So I find that interesting, that they felt that the number one priority is to rule out a crazy situation where a small base chooses an extremist leader, and then you end up with a Nazi party In Germany, they felt that the number one problem was how to organize a voting system such that you rule out the possibility of a small base which gets through first past the post and you get the Nazi party. So I think there are many nuances in that. I'm not remotely an expert on the question, but I just want to seed that thought with our readers that think about Germany, think about the journey to the German constitution. The second thing I want to say is that you remember you and I had a great conversation with the political thinker and philosopher Vitalik Buterin, and I was fascinated at the way Vitalik felt that the core problem of voting systems is that it is too easy to bribe a person to vote against their interest. And we see this in India all the time, that frontline electoral politics is a game of going to one community elder or one basti at a time, and the highest bidder gets those votes. So it's really a very depressing phenomenon. It may not be happening in the advanced economies, but it is happening in India, and it creates an amplified opportunity for money power. The third thing in this field is that a critical enabling factor for that kind of corruption in politics is the problem of booth level data transparency. That because the voting outcome is visible one booth at a time, and a booth is 2,000 people, then the winning party is able to have that reciprocity of carrot and stick against that basti, saying, we know how many votes you gave us, and we will hold you as a community responsible, and we will do collective punishment. And this is a very fundamental negation of the concept of liberal democracy. So I feel when we go after first principles questions around the self-interest and behavior of each of these, a lot of our simple notions of the goodness of liberal democracy don't stand up, and we need to do a lot of hard thinking and change the way in which the liberal democracy works so that these bugs and these pathologies are eliminated.
So a question that often people bring up is that given rational ignorance, why do people vote, right? If the vote is not going to make a difference. Now, people vote for various reasons. One is a straightforward one, that it is a normative thing. Even if it doesn't make a difference, you are going to vote because you have constructed in your head an image of a good citizen, and that is what a good citizen does, so you go out and do it. In the same way as if you're driving on an empty road, if you're turning left, you will still do the left indicator. It is a normative behavior. Every time you turn left, you do the left indicator. On this specific instance, there may be no one behind you, it doesn't make a difference, but you kind of do it anyway, unless you're in Bombay and you drive like me. But leaving that aside, and also, people vote for a variety of different reasons. Like, one theory is a vote to show tribal affiliation. You vote for the same reason that you go to a Manchester United game. You'll wear that red t-shirt and you'll be like, this is my club, this is my tribe. So similarly, you vote for that. You don't really expect it to make a difference, and blah, blah, blah. But leaving that aside, one interesting question I got hit with, like once I hadn't voted in an election and someone said you should not have an opinion about the result if you did not vote. And I disagreed strongly with that. I said I did not vote because I did not feel any party worth voting for. And I didn't even want to do the tactical thing of voting for the least evil. And my vote in a marketplace is actually a vote for an alternative. The way I think about it is, if I go to buy a shirt, in a mall, but I don't find a single shirt I like. They're all shit shirts, right? I am not obliged to buy a shirt. My not buying a shirt is a signal that there is a gap in the market, and maybe that can be fulfilled. Similarly, the large number of people in this country who do not vote, in a sense, are a signal to political entrepreneurs that these parties are not satisfying all the needs. They're not satisfying all the demands. You can go in there and you can fill that. And that, in a sense, is exactly what the Aam Aadmi Party did. Now, I don't like the Aam Aadmi Party either. I called them out right from before they formed, in fact, when Anna's movement was going on. But nevertheless, as an exercise in political entrepreneurship, it is remarkably successful. They saw that there is a gap in the market. The middle class person is this affected. They are sick of the regular politician. They want someone who looks more like a, regular middle class Joe, who talk about the things they care about, such as corruption. And today, of course, with the benefit of all these years gone by and having read all the literature on it, you and I know that the first rallying cry in populist movements is corruption. But we didn't know that then. So that is an example of successful political entrepreneurship that happened then. And therefore, I think that sometimes not voting is as important as can be as important as voting. It is also an expression. But I know this is controversial. But what is your view on your duty as a citizen within this current system of democracy that we have?
So, as basics of political philosophy, the state has no right to ask duties of the people. Okay, like there are fundamental rights about where the parliament cannot coerce people in certain ways. Beyond that, the fundamental right of the people is to be left alone, and maybe my parents can ask me for certain duties, but I rebel at the word duties. I am very sad to say, but I have not voted because I never felt the cost benefit analysis made sense, and it has been a mystery to me why people vote.
So, last chapter, what public choice theory teaches you is the most important thing of all, the rules of the game, right? Here's the thing, people are responding to incentives. Where are those incentives coming from? They are part of the design of the state. They are part, in countries like ours, of what the constitution sets out. The constitution lays the rules of the game. The constitution makes us a republic. Now, typically, what a good constitution should do in a republic is protect the people from the state. It should put limits on what the state can do, and it should protect the rights of the citizens. Our constitution, for understandable reasons, the country was falling apart. There was no sense whether all the princely states will come together. You did not know if the center would hold. Our constitution centralized power massively and created a replica of the colonial state, where the state, they were the rulers and we were the subjects, and the constitution, in a sense, in many ways protects the state from dangerous things that we might do, such as free speech. I mean, the constitution supposedly pays lip service to free speech, for example, but there are so many caveats to that, such as public order, decency, etc., etc. And I have a great episode with Tripurdaman Singh on the First Amendment, which harmed our free speech desperately. So I think of our constitution, and at one level, there is an interesting dilemma that it is obviously less liberal than you and I would like in the classical liberal sense, but it is more liberal than society. So you have a relatively liberal constitution imposed on an illiberal society by a bunch of unelected people. And should that, how should we think about that is one question. But that is not even the question I kind of want to bring up. What public choice theory teaches us is that the rules of the game are important. That if you constrain power, then there is only so much damage that a politician can do. Like the best system that I can think of is a system in which the worst person in the world, and Adolf Hitler even, can get to power and not manage to do any damage, because he or she simply doesn't have that much power. The state doesn't have that much power. That is the best system. Unfortunately, we don't have that system. We have what you call the administrative state, and we are the ruled, we are the subjects, instead of it being sort of the other way around. So how do you think of this? Especially, Buchanan and Tullock talk about this a lot, setting the rules of the game. And their sense is the constitution should be something on which there is consensus. Only those things on which everybody agrees, so there is no imposition on anyone. And then around that, you have the messy business of dealing with different interests and different groups and figuring out what to do. But we don't live in that utopia where consensus is possible. We live in a world with an imperfect constitution. If we try to, and which is, there's an old cartoon about how somebody goes to the parliament bookshop and says, can I have the constitution? And the reply is, we only stock books here, not periodicals. And Shruti Rajgopalan, our friend, has a great video on the many times the constitution has been amended. So right from Nehru onwards, every time the people in power wanted to do something unconstitutional, they just amended the constitution and made it constitutional. That's been a case from every government Nehru onwards. Shruti's video is fantastic, so I'd recommend gentle readers watch that and get a sense of that. But here we are stuck with an imperfect constitution which allows the oppressive state to be as oppressive as it wants to be. It is not one party or the other. It really doesn't matter who is in power. The oppressive state is the oppressive state. It's a fundamental problem we are dealing with. The rules of the game are what they are. And what are your thoughts?
I don't think that well-drafted, successful constitutions are particularly a reflection of the broader consensus. Most constitution drafting projects have been undemocratic. They've been elite projects. So you think of the immense successes of the German or the Japanese constitutions. Well, these were imposed by a colonial power to some extent. So I'm not fussed about some simple one-to-one identification that some mechanism for discovering the views of the people and encoding it into a constitution. Is it either necessary or sufficient? I think constitution drafting projects are elitist projects, so-called a constitutional moment.
Elite rather than elitist.
Elite projects, and there is a constitutional moment where some people wrote a United States Constitution, some people wrote the Constitution of India, and we lucked out and got a fairly bad document. Okay, so that's just the way to think about it. I think that there has been good legal philosophy in India accumulating around notions like basic structure, that there is actually a constitution which is the basic structure, where by and large the judiciary has been defending it against amendments, sometimes, though not always. And the rest of the constitution is like one more parliamentary law, and it keeps getting amended all the time. And in a way, it's the verbiage around a bulky, badly written document that ends up getting edited all the time. So I'm not that unhappy at that state of affairs. And then it encourages us to be in a more British tradition where it's not a written constitution. And then we are actually in a world of what the philosophers want to think as what is a meaningful and sensible and wise application of basic structure doctrine, and where are the egregious failures where there is behavior by the Indian state that is violative of the elementary freedoms in the basic structure, and somewhere in that potentially we could find our way towards a constitutional doctrine that might make reasonable sense. So there you are, gentle reader, and you have another marvelous pillar for your mind, which is public choice theory. It is disconcerting, but it is the cold reality of the world, that we should think of the state as an optimizing bunch of people, and it has far-reaching implications for how we think about the world. So we'll sign off here and see you next Friday.
Tell me when to stop. I'm enjoying this. Tell me when to stop.